no idea what the Egyptians really ate. Now you will learn the whole truth. Pyramids, pharaohs, mysterious hieroglyphs. We think we know almost everything about ancient Egypt. But what if I told you that our ideas about the daily life of the Egyptians, especially their food, are full of myths and inaccuracies? We imagine a meager diet of bread and beer, but it was much more complex and interesting than that. Behind every meal was a whole system of production, beliefs, and social rituals that created a great civilization. Watch the video to the end to find out what unexpected ingredient the Egyptians added to their bread. I will reveal the most closely guarded secret of Egyptian cuisine. Bread was not just the staple of the diet, it was currency, a measure of wealth, and even part of religious rituals. It was given as wages to pyramid builders, officials, and soldiers. Contrary to popular belief, Egyptian bread was not always coarse and unleavened. Archaeologists have found evidence of more than 40 different types of bread. They differed in shape, flour, and additives. There were breads in the shape of triangles, ovals, and even stylized figures. They were baked not only for food, but also for offerings in temples. Each type had its own name and purpose. The secret of this diversity lay in the flour. The Egyptians mainly used two types of grain: emmer, a type of spelt, and barley. The quality of the grinding directly affected the final product. For the poor, bread was baked from coarse flour with a large amount of bran. Such bread was dense and filling, but required strong teeth. The aristocracy, on the other hand, could afford products made from finely sifted flour. A unique feature of Egyptian bread was the additives. Dates could be added to the dough for sweetness, nuts for nutrition, or herbs for flavor. This turned ordinary bread into a real delicacy. However, there was also an unpleasant aspect. The stone millstones used to grind the grain left tiny particles of sand and stone in the flour. This led to severe tooth wear among the entire population, from the pharaoh to the common peasant.
This tooth needs to come out now.
The baking process was also varied. The simplest method was to bake flat bread directly on hot stones or in ashes. More complex products were baked in special clay molds that were preheated. These molds allowed bread to be made in different sizes and shapes. Some of them were conical, which helped the dough bake evenly. It was in these molds that bread was baked for temple ceremonies. Thus, bread in ancient Egypt was a whole universe. It reflected the social status, religious beliefs, and culinary preferences of its time. It was not just a product, but the foundation of an entire civilization. Are you ready to learn the truth about the most popular drink in ancient Egypt? Beer was not just an alcoholic beverage, but an essential part of the diet, equal in importance to bread. Everyone drank it, from young to old, and it was considered more of a food than just a drink. Egyptian beer was very different from modern beer. It was thick, cloudy, and very nutritious, more like liquid porridge. It was not filtered. The production process began with the preparation of special beer cakes. Barley or wheat dough was not fully baked in order to preserve the activity of the enzymes. These cakes were the basis for the future drink. They were then crumbled into a large vat with water and date juice, which served as a source of sugar for fermentation. The mixture was left for several days. The result was a thick, sweetish, low-alcohol drink. There were many varieties of beer, which differed in taste, color, and strength. There was sweet beer, thick beer, and beer for offerings. The names of the varieties often indicated their purpose. Beer, like bread, was used as payment for labor. The norm for a simple worker was about 2 to 3 jugs of beer a day. This provided him with the calories necessary for hard physical work. The drink also played an important role in medicine. Various herbs and roots were added to beer, turning it into a medicine. Images of brewers in the beer-making process are often found on the walls of tombs. This emphasizes the importance of beer not only in earthly life, but also in the afterlife. The Egyptians believed that even after death, they would need their favorite drink. Unlike wine, which was mainly available to the elite, beer was a truly democratic drink. It brought together simple farmers and noble lords at the same table. Beer was an integral part of any holiday or gathering. So what made this drink so special, and why was it, rather than water, the basis of the daily diet? Are you ready to find out how the Egyptians dealt with the problem of clean drinking water and what role brewing played in this?
This honey is from the purest flowers.
Something you've never seen
Truly looks
before?
magnificent.
It is commonly believed that the ancient diet was bland and monotonous, but the Egyptians had a real sweet tooth. Their main source of sweetness was honey, which was valued as highly as gold. Beekeeping was developed to an incredible level. The Egyptians used special cylindrical clay hives. The product obtained from bees was not only a delicacy, but also an important preservative and medicine. Honey was used to glaze baked goods and meat. It was added to drinks and sauces. Various desserts were made from honey by mixing it with nuts, dates. Another important source of sugar was dates. Date palms grew in abundance along the banks of the Nile. The fruits were eaten fresh, dried, and sun-dried. Dates were used to make syrup, which served as a sweetener. They were also used to make a kind of candy by grinding the pulp and mixing it with nuts and spices. These delicacies were available to all segments of the population. Figs were no less popular. Like dates, they were eaten fresh and dried. Dried figs were an excellent source of energy and could be stored for a very long time. The Egyptians also grew grapes. Part of the harvest was used to make wine, and part was dried to make raisins. Raisins were added to baked goods and other dishes. Surprisingly, the Egyptians also knew about the fruits of the carob tree. Its sweet pods were ground into a powder that tasted like cocoa. This powder was used to make sweet drinks and desserts. There were also real confectionery products. The remains of cakes made from flour, honey, nuts, and fruit have been found in tombs. These delicacies were prepared for the nobility and for special occasions. Thus, the sweet life in ancient Egypt was not a myth, but a reality. The availability of a variety of sweeteners allowed for a rich palette of flavors. Egyptian cuisine was much sweeter than we are accustomed to thinking.
Cakes are divine. Oh.
So many sweet delights.
What if I showed you a time machine? Let's travel to the fields of ancient Egypt and see what grew there. Vegetables made up a significant part of the diet and were not a supplement, but a full-fledged food. The main vegetable was the onion. It was valued not only for its taste, but also for its healing properties. Onions were believed to give strength and endurance, so they were given in large quantities to the builders of the pyramids. Garlic played an equally important role. Like onions, it was both food and medicine. Its images are often found on the walls of tombs. The Egyptians grew several types of lettuce. Interestingly, they associated this plant with Min, the god of fertility. Lettuce was a mandatory dish at many religious festivals. The cucumbers known to the Egyptians were more bitter than modern varieties. Nevertheless, they were enjoyed fresh. They were excellent for quenching thirst in the hot climate. Legumes also grew in the fields. Lentils, chickpeas, and peas. They were the main source of plant protein, especially for those who could not afford to eat meat often. Legumes were used to make thick soups and purees. Root vegetables included radishes and turnips. They were eaten both raw and cooked. Radishes were prized for their pungency and juiciness. Melons and watermelons were a favorite summer treat. They were not only filling, but also helped replenish the body's fluid loss. Their sweet flesh was a real salvation from the heat. All this vegetable abundance would have been impossible without the Nile. The annual flooding of the river fertilized the soil with fertile silt. This allowed several harvests to be gathered each year. But how did the Egyptians manage to cook all these foods without the stoves and ovens we are used to? In the next chapter, you will learn about the cooking techniques they used. At the center of any ancient Egyptian kitchen was a hearth. It was a simple structure made of adobe bricks or stones. Most dishes were cooked on it. Clay pots of various sizes were used for cooking. They were placed directly on the coals or suspended over the fire on a special tripod. Frying was less common but still practiced. Food could be fried on flat stones placed on the hearth. Shallow clay pans were also used. Baking occupied a special place. Special ovens similar to modern tandoors were used for this purpose. These were large clay structures that were heated from the inside, and then dough was molded onto their hot walls. This method allowed bread and flatbread to be baked quickly and evenly. The products had a crispy crust. This baking method is still used in many countries in the Middle East. Stone mortars and pestles were used to grind food. They were used to crush grain, spices, nuts, and dried fruits. It was hard and monotonous work. Knives were made of bronze. They were sharp enough to cut vegetables and meat. Various scrapers and spatulas made of wood or bone were also used in the household. Food was stored in large clay pots. To protect it from pests, they were tightly covered with lids and sealed with clay. Grain was stored in special barns with thick walls. Tableware was made of clay, stone, or faience. For ordinary people, it was simple and functional. The nobility used elegant painted tableware. Kitchen utensils and cooking methods remained virtually unchanged for thousands of years. The Egyptians found simple and effective solutions that fully met their needs. What if I told you that everything you believed was wrong? We are used to thinking of fatty foods as unhealthy, but for the Egyptians, oils and fats were an essential source of energy. In conditions of hard physical labor, high-calorie food was vital. The main source of vegetable oil was flax. Its seeds were pressed to obtain valuable linseed oil. It was used not only for food, but also for lighting and cosmetic purposes. The Egyptians also produced oil from radish seeds. It had a pungent, distinctive taste and was used as a condiment. This oil was less common than flaxseed oil. The Egyptians also knew sesame oil. Sesame was grown in special fields. The oil from it was highly valued for its pleasant,
Fresh
nutty
radish
aroma.
seed oil. Come closer, feel the distinctive aroma, and see the quality.
Olive oil was known, but it wasn't produced in large quantities in Egypt itself. The country's climate wasn't the best for growing olives. In addition to vegetable oils, animal fats were also widely used. They were obtained during the preparation of meat dishes. The fat was carefully collected and stored for further use. Fat was used for frying and stewing. It made dishes more filling and improved their taste. It was also added to soups. The presence of fats in the diet was a sign of wealth. The poor mainly consumed vegetable oils. Meat fats were found on the tables of the nobility and priests. Oils and fats also played an important role in food preservation. For example, meat could be covered with a layer of fat to protect it from spoiling.
Fresh meat.
This allowed for
Perfectly
long-term
preserved
storage.
for your journey.
What role did spices and seasonings play in this fatty and high-calorie cuisine? In the next chapter, you will learn how the Egyptians made their food not only nutritious, Ancient Egyptian cuisine was not bland. A wide range of spices and herbs were used to add flavor and aroma to dishes. Many of them were grown right in the gardens next to the houses. The most important seasoning was salt. It was extracted from salt lakes and deposits in the desert. Salt was not only a flavor enhancer, but also an essential preservative. Coriander was widely used. Its seeds have been found in the tombs of the pharaohs, including the tomb of Tutankhamun. Coriander was added to bread, meat dishes, and beer. Cumin was another popular spice. It was valued for its spicy aroma and used to flavor baked goods and sauces. It was also believed to have medicinal properties. The Egyptians grew and used dill. Its greens and seeds were added to vegetable dishes and soups. It gave food a fresh, summery aroma. Mustard seeds were used to add spiciness. They were ground and added to sauces and marinades. Mustard was one of the few hot spices available. Mint grew in abundance and was used to flavor drinks and desserts. It was also added to salads. Mint was considered a plant that freshened breath. Fenugreek was a well-known imported spice. Its seeds had a bitter taste and a strong aroma. Fenugreek was used in small quantities to add spice to dishes. Garlic and onions, which have already been mentioned, were also more like seasonings than just vegetables. Their pungent taste and smell were an integral part of most Egyptian dishes. The use of such a variety of spices indicates a developed culinary culture. The Egyptians valued not only the satiety, but also the taste of food. They knew how to create complex and harmonious flavor combinations. Although plant-based foods formed the basis of the diet, Egyptians also consumed protein-rich foods. Access to these foods depended heavily on social status. For most of the population, meat was a festive dish. The main source of meat was cattle. Beef was considered food for the elite and was served at feasts for nobles and pharaohs. It was cooked in large pieces, roasted over an open fire. Sheep and goat meat was more affordable. It was most often stewed in pots with vegetables and spices. Such a dish was filling and did not require constant attention during cooking. Poultry was also eaten. These were mainly ducks and geese, which were bred on the special farms. The birds were roasted whole, often stuffed with bread and herbs. Fish was the most important source of protein for all segments of the population. The Nile and lakes provided a huge amount of different types of fish. It was eaten fresh, but more often than not, it was preserved for future use. To preserve it, fish was salted and dried in the sun. Such dried fish could be stored for months and was indispensable as a reserve. It was a constant part of the diet of builders, soldiers, and travelers. Fish was also smoked using smoke from fires. This method not only preserved the product, but also gave it a pleasant aroma. Smoked fish was considered a delicacy. The Egyptians knew milk, which they obtained from cows and goats, as a dairy product. It was drunk fresh, but more often used to make cheese and cottage cheese. These products allowed milk to be preserved for a longer period of time. The cheese was simple, soft, and salty. It was pressed in special molds and aged for several days. Cheese was a convenient and nutritious food that could be taken on the road. Thus, the protein diet of the Egyptians was quite varied. It included products of both animal and river origin. This provided the population with the necessary nutrients. For the Egyptian nobility, food was not just a means of satisfying hunger. Feasts and banquets were an important part of social and political life. They demonstrated the wealth, status, and power of the host. The tables at the feasts of the pharaohs and nobles were laden with delicacies. Dozens of different dishes were served. The emphasis was on abundance and variety. Roasted meat was an essential part of such feasts. Whole bulls, antelopes, and gazelles were roasted. Poultry was served in huge quantities. Roasted geese, ducks, and quails. The side dishes were no less exquisite. Rare vegetables seasoned with expensive imported spices were served. Bread was baked from the finest flour with the addition of nuts and honey. Desserts were true works of art. Confectioners prepared complex pastries, honey cakes, and fruit salads. All of this was decorated and served on expensive tableware. The main drink at noble feasts was wine. Several varieties of grapes were grown in Egypt, and both red and white wines were produced. The best wines were brought from oases and from abroad. Each jug of wine had a special label. It indicated the year of harvest, the vineyard, and the name of the winemaker. This was one of the world's first wine quality control systems. The feast was accompanied by music, dancing, and entertainment. Guests were offered to wash their hands in fragrant water and were anointed with incense. Everything was aimed at creating an atmosphere of luxury and pleasure. Images of such feasts are often found in tombs. They were supposed to magically ensure eternal abundance for the deceased in the afterlife. The Egyptians believed that even after death, they would enjoy luxurious meals. These feasts contrasted sharply with the modest diet of ordinary Egyptians. Food was one of the most striking markers of social inequality. The gap between the cuisine of the palace and that of the hut was enormous. Ideas about food in ancient Egypt were inextricably linked to beliefs about the afterlife. The Egyptians believed that the soul of the deceased, their ka, needed food to exist in the other world. Therefore, providing the deceased with provisions was an essential part of funeral ritual. The tombs of pharaohs and nobles were literally filled with food. Special chambers were used to store jugs of wine and beer, baskets of bread and fruit. Whole roasted carcasses of animals and birds were left behind. This food was real. Archaeologists find perfectly preserved samples of food that are several thousand years old. The dry climate of Egypt contributed to their mummification. However, the Egyptians understood that real food would spoil over time. Therefore, endless scenes of offerings were depicted on the walls of the tombs. It was believed that the magical power of the drawing could replace the real object. The walls were painted with tables laden with delicacies, processions of servants carrying food, and entire fields where crops were ripening. All this was supposed to provide the deceased with eternal sustenance. The texts accompanying the drawings contained spells that brought to life the food depicted. In addition to images, models of food were placed in the tombs. Miniature copies of bread, vegetables, and pieces of meat were made from clay or wood. These models were also supposed to magically turn into real food in the other world. Funeral offerings occupied a special place. The relatives of the deceased had to regularly visit the tomb and bring real food and drink. This was their sacred duty. For those who did not have wealthy relatives, there was a special service provided by priests. For a certain fee, they undertook to regularly feed the soul of the deceased. It was a kind of subscription to eternal nourishment. Thus, food in ancient Egypt had two dimensions, the real and the sacred. It was necessary not only to sustain physical life, but also to ensure the eternal existence of the soul. Cooking and religion were inextricably linked here. We can see that food in ancient Egypt was much more than just a source of calories. It was the foundation on which the entire civilization was built. Its economy, social structure, and even religion. The fate of the pyramid builders depended on the quality of the grain milling, and the prestige of the pharaoh depended on the variety of wine. The Egyptians' diet was the result of their ingenious adaptation to the unique conditions of the Nile Valley. They learned to get the most out of their land by creating a sustainable and diverse food system. Please suggest topics for future videos that you would like to see on our channel in the comments. What other secrets of ancient Egypt should we reveal?
Come get your bread, freshly baked every day.